West Texas, 1856. No roads worth mentioning, no water worth finding, and apparently, no shortage of bad ideas worth trying. This is the story of the U.S. Army Camel Corps. It worked. Nobody was ready for that either. In 1856, the United States Army imported camels. Not metaphorically, not as a joke, actual camels, from Egypt and the Middle East, shipped across the Atlantic Ocean and unloaded in Texas. The plan was to use them as military pack animals in the West Texas desert. It worked. And then it fell apart completely. And then the camels escaped into the wild, and West Texas had a camel problem for the next 50 years. To understand why the Army imported camels, you need to understand what moving supplies across West Texas looked like in the 1850s. It was a disaster. The land between San Antonio and El Paso was some of the most inhospitable terrain in North America. Horses needed water every day. Mules were barely better. The distances between water sources were brutal, and the heat was relentless. The Army was trying to supply a string of frontier forts across hundreds of miles of desert, and it was killing animals and men at an unsustainable rate. Someone needed a better idea. That someone was Jefferson Davis. In 1853, Davis was Secretary of War, before he became famous for other reasons, and he looked at West Texas, looked at the Middle East, and arrived at what he considered an obvious conclusion. The desert there worked fine. They used camels. Davis lobbied Congress for 2 years. In 1855, Congress approved $30,000 for the experiment. The Army sent Major Henry Wayne to Egypt and the Mediterranean to purchase camels and hire handlers who knew how to work with them. In 1856, 34 camels arrived at Indianola, Texas. The locals were not prepared for this. The camels performed extraordinarily well. They carried heavier loads than mules. They traveled further between water stops. They handled the heat without complaint. They ate plants that horses and mules refused to touch. On a survey expedition from Texas to California, led by Edward Beale in 1857, the camels outperformed every other animal in the party. The Army ordered more. By 1857, the herd had grown to over 70 animals. Everything was going well. Then the Civil War started. Jefferson Davis left Washington to become President of the Confederacy, and nobody in the Union Army was particularly attached to his camel experiment. The Camel Corps was quietly abandoned. Some camels were sold to circuses and zoos. Some were sold to private buyers. Some were used by mining operations in the Southwest, and some were simply released into the desert. This turned out to be a problem. Camels are not native to North America, but they are extremely good at surviving in it. The released camels thrived in the West Texas and Arizona desert. They startled horses, they raided camps, they appeared without warning on remote trails and caused general chaos among anyone who encountered them and had no idea what they were looking at. Wild camel sightings were reported across the Southwest for decades. The last credible reported sighting in Texas was in 1941. One of the original handlers, a Syrian cameleer named Haji Ali, who the soldiers called Hi Jolly because they couldn't pronounce his name, stayed in America after the experiment ended. He spent the rest of his life in the Arizona desert. He died in 1902. Arizona built him a monument. It is shaped like a pyramid, with a camel on top. So why did the U.S. Army use camels in West Texas? Because West Texas is a desert, and camels are very good at deserts, and for one brief moment, someone in Washington had a completely reasonable idea that the rest of the government was not ready for. The camels worked, the timing didn't. And somewhere out in the West Texas scrubland, for about 80 years after anyone expected it, something large and strange and completely out of place was still wandering around, just like it always had been. The camels outlasted the program, the war, and most of the men who thought the whole thing was ridiculous. Hi Jolly stayed in the desert until he died. Arizona gave him a pyramid. Make of that what you will.